So today we look at the third of our sermons in our series of God's Big Story. So far we've looked at the creation and how that reflects God to us, the fall and how humankind spoilt creation and broke that relationship with God, and humans becoming in need of rescue. And today we look at commands for living. In the Old Testament, God tries to restore his relationship with people, choosing particular people to work with him, and he spoke through the words of the prophets, but the people didn't listen and were awaiting the Messiah. And the passage that goes with today is Exodus chapter 20. God spoke all these words. I am God, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of a life of slavery. No other gods, only me. No carved gods of any size, shape or form of anything whatever, whether of things that fly or walk or swim. Don't bow down to them and don't serve them, because I am God, your God, and I'm a most jealous God, punishing the children for any sins their parents pass on to them, to the third, and yes, even to the fourth generation of those who hate me. But I'm unswervingly loyal to the thousands who love me and keep my commandments. No using the name of God, your God, in curses or silly banter. God won't put up with the irreverent use of his name. Observe the Sabbath day, keep it holy. Work 6 days and do everything you need to do. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to God, your God. Don't do any work, not you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your servant, nor your maid, nor your animals, not even the foreign guest visiting in your town. For in 6 days God made heaven, earth and sea, and everything in them. He rested on the seventh day. Therefore God blessed the Sabbath day. He set it apart as a holy day. Honour your father and mother so that you'll live a long time in the land that God, your God, is giving you. No murder, no adultery, no stealing, no lies about your neighbour, no lusting after your neighbour's house or wife or servant or maid or ox or donkey. Don't set your heart on anything that is your neighbour's. All the people experiencing the thunder and lightning, the trumpet blast and the smoking mountain were afraid. They pulled back and stood at a distance. They said to Moses, "You speak to us and we'll listen. But don't have God speak to us or we'll die." Moses spoke to the people. Don't be afraid. God has come to test you and instill a deep and reverent awe within you so that you won't sin. The people kept their distance while Moses approached the thick cloud where God was. God said to Moses, "Give this message to the people of Israel. You've experienced firsthand how I spoke with you from heaven. Don't make gods of silver and gods of gold and then set them alongside me. Make me an earthen altar. Sacrifice your whole burnt offerings, your peace offerings, your sheep and your cattle on it. Every place where I cause my name to be honoured in your worship, I'll be there myself and bless you. If you use stones to make my altar, don't use dressed stones. If you use a chisel on the stones, you'll profane the altar. Don't use steps to climb to my altar, because that will expose your nakedness." Lots of people in society will tell you that they're good people and that they live their lives according to the 10 Commandments. But if you ask them to list them, they might be able to name 3 or 4, but the vast majority really probably couldn't name all 10. They're a key part of the whole Bible, and yet so few people really understand what they're all about. Probably the biggest misconception people have is thinking that keeping the 10 Commandments will get you into heaven, and that's not the case. My son has bought himself a motorbike, and whilst he's really practical, he's not a mechanic by any means. But he uses his trusty Haynes manual to learn how to fix and service it so he can get the most out of it. The 10 Commandments are God's maker's handbook for human beings. They tell us how we're supposed to live, and if the human race actually followed them, the world would be a much better place. But the sad reality is we don't live according to them. We rebel against God's good design, and so we live in a world of sin and hurt and frustration. God could just step in and forcibly make people behave, but he doesn't do that, because the Bible makes it clear that God made a covenant with Israel, an agreement between unequal partners binding them together with certain expectations, and that God kept his covenant promise. The first important thing to note about the 10 Commandments is that they aren't designed to bring us into a relationship with God. Don't forget, Israel was already in a relationship with God. God had made a covenant with Abraham and his descendants centuries before. and he delivered them from Egypt as a direct result of that agreement, and had reaffirmed that Israel was his chosen people. If we look closely at the opening words of the Ten Commandments, it says, "I am the Lord your God." It shows clearly that Israel was already in relationship with God when he gave them the Ten Commandments. And secondly, they weren't designed as some sort of entrance exam to get into heaven. This is probably the biggest misconception of all about the Ten Commandments. Being a good person, going to church, following the commandments aren't how we get to heaven. Ephesians 2 verses 8 to 9 says, "It is by grace you have been saved, through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast." Grace is God's unmerited favour, demonstrated most fully in the sacrifice of Christ. In short, the only way to heaven is through Jesus, the way, the truth and the life, as we're told in John 14 verse 6. So if that's not what the Ten Commandments are all about, what is the purpose of them? Well, first of all, the law is designed to reveal God's character to us. Every one of the Ten Commandments reflects some aspect of the character of God. For example, why shouldn't you lie? Because God is truth, and so on. Far more than being a man-centric to-do list, the Ten Commandments teach us about God's perfect character. The laws are windows into God's holiness, and it follows then, to fulfill the law means to be as much like God as we can be. The commandments don't push us from God, they bring us closer to him. So if you want to know what God's like, look at the Ten Commandments. Secondly, the law is designed to restrain moral evil caused by humans. The Ten Commandments have exerted a great moral influence in society by restraining evil. God has given us his law, but we can't keep it. Take a look at how many commandments the people of Israel broke while Moses was on the mountain. They broke just about every commandment going immediately after receiving them. They struggle with how to live, wanting to walk with God, but wrestling with the daily reality of their rebellion. Rather than seeing these commandments as rules imposed by a tyrannical God, the Israelites see them as a helpful guide for demonstrating their ongoing gratitude to God for rescuing them. Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." In other words, Jesus didn't say that the Ten Commandments were null and void. Far from it. He preaches that actually they require more than a face value glance. More than avoiding a specific behaviour like murder, Jesus teaches that the perfect obedience to the law asks us to go further and to love our enemies. There's a story about the Taliabo people of Indonesia who were visited by missionaries who began to teach them the Bible. One of the first things was the Ten Commandments. Not long after, there was a visit from some of the men in the tribe who said, "We're in big trouble with God. God's law tells us not to kill, but we've killed other men. God's law tells us not to steal, but we've stolen. We've broken God's commandments, but we didn't know that God commanded these things. From now on, we'll keep them." A few weeks later, they returned and they said, "We're in really big trouble with God now because we know his commandments, but we still break them." That's why God gave them to us, to show us that we're sinners, so that we will come to Christ, have that relationship with Jesus, and we will receive salvation. Amen.